For decades, Nashville presented itself as the heart of country music, a place where talent alone decided who stayed and who faded away. But behind the polite smiles and handshake deals, another system quietly existed. Some legends were never banned, never officially rejected, yet their songs slowly vanished from radio, their names disappeared from festival posters, and the phone simply stopped ringing. Tonight, we uncover 10 country legends Nashville quietly pushed into silence. Waylon Jennings. At his peak, Waylon Jennings was not just a star, he was a warning sign. In the 1970s, when Nashville still controlled every note that reached the radio, Waylon did the unthinkable. He demanded artistic control. He rejected the polished countrypolitan sound. He challenged producers, radio programmers, and executives who believed country music should be safe, predictable, and easy to sell. For a brief moment, he won. Outlaw country exploded, and Waylon stood at its center. But Nashville never forgot who embarrassed the system. Waylon was never banned. No press release ever declared him unwelcome. His records were still released. His concerts still sold tickets. Yet something subtle began to change. Radio programmers became less enthusiastic. Promotional budgets shrank. Invitations to industry events quietly stopped arriving. The same city that once celebrated his rebellion began to treat him as a liability rather than a legend. The problem was not his talent. It was his mouth. Waylon spoke openly about the hypocrisy of the music industry, about radio payola, about executives who profited from artists while demanding obedience in return. In Nashville, reputation matters more than truth, and Waylon had become known as someone who would not stay quiet. As the 1980s arrived, a new generation of cleaner, safer country stars took over the airwaves. Waylon's music did not suddenly become bad. It simply became inconvenient. His songs no longer fit the image Nashville wanted to sell to advertisers and mainstream audiences. Without ever being officially pushed out, he was slowly sidelined. What makes Waylon's story uncomfortable is that he never disappeared. He kept recording. He kept touring. He kept his loyal fans. But he was no longer treated as part of the future of country music. He became history while still very much alive. In the end, Waylon Jennings paid the price for winning a battle Nashville never intended to lose. He proved that artists could take control, and for that, the industry quietly made sure he would never be too influential again. No blacklist was announced. No doors were slammed. They were simply left unlocked for everyone else. Merle Haggard. Merle Haggard was once the voice Nashville could not ignore. Born into hardship, shaped by prison walls and personal regret, his songs carried a weight few others could match. In the late 1960s and 1970s, Merle was everywhere. His music dominated radio, his words spoke directly to working-class America, and Nashville proudly presented him as the embodiment of authentic country music. But Merle was never comfortable being owned. Unlike many stars who carefully stayed within the lines, Merle followed his instincts, even when they contradicted the industry's expectations. His political views shifted over time. He questioned his own earlier messages. He refused to freeze himself into a single image for radio programmers or record executives. To Nashville, that unpredictability was dangerous. There was no scandal that ended Merle Haggard's career, no public collapse, no dramatic controversy. Instead, his relationship with the industry slowly cooled. Radio formats tightened. Programmers wanted simpler messages, cleaner narratives, and artists who could be easily categorized. Merle's music grew more reflective, more complex, and less interested in fitting into neat boxes. Behind the scenes, the support quietly faded. Promotion became minimal. Singles that once would have been pushed heavily were now released with little expectation. Industry attention shifted to younger faces who delivered fewer questions and more certainty. Merle was still respected, but respect did not translate into airplay. What makes Merle's quiet sidelining especially telling is that his songwriting never lost its power. Fellow musicians continued to praise him. Critics still recognized his brilliance. Fans remained devoted. Yet Nashville treated him as a relic rather than a living force. He was invited to be honored for his past, not included in conversations about the future. Merle Haggard did not disappear because he failed. He faded because he refused to remain useful on Nashville's terms. The industry prefers legends who stay predictable and silent. Merle did neither. By the time his later albums arrived, they were received as footnotes instead of events. Not because the music lacked quality, but because Nashville had already moved on. Quietly. Politely. Tanya Tucker entered Nashville as a phenomenon, not a project. Barely a teenager, she already possessed a voice that sounded lived in, wounded, and unmistakably real. In the early 1970s, Nashville embraced her as a miracle. She delivered hit after hit, and for a time, the industry proudly pointed to Tanya as proof that country music could still feel raw while selling millions of records. But Tanya grew up, and Nashville did not know what to do with a woman who refused to grow up quietly. As she moved into adulthood, Tanya rejected the carefully managed image expected of female country stars. She lived loudly, spoke honestly, and made personal choices that did not fit the industry's comfort zone. Unlike male artists, who were often forgiven for excess and rebellion, Tanya's independence was treated as a liability. The rules were different for her, and everyone in Nashville knew it. There was no defining scandal that ended her reign. Instead, radio support gradually weakened. Singles that would have once been automatic hits received less promotion. Industry backing became inconsistent. Tanya was not told she was unwanted. She was simply no longer prioritized. Behind closed doors, executives questioned her marketability. Programmers worried about advertisers. Nashville preferred female artists who appeared controlled, polished, and predictable. Tanya was none of those things. She was talented, outspoken, and impossible to package safely. That made her dangerous. By the late 1980s and 1990s, Tanya Tucker was no longer a central figure in Nashville's future plans. Newer artists filled radio playlists while Tanya's releases arrived quietly, often without the full support of the machine that once championed her. The industry reframed her as a troubled former star rather than acknowledging its own discomfort with her autonomy. What makes Tanya's story especially revealing is that her talent never disappeared. When given the opportunity decades later, she proved she still belonged at the highest level. The voice was still there. The presence was still undeniable. What had been missing was not ability, but access. Tanya Tucker was not canceled. She was sidelined. Nashville did not shut the door in her face. It simply stopped holding it open. And for a woman who refused to be controlled, that quiet withdrawal spoke louder than any public rejection ever could. Allan Coe. Allan Coe was never meant to survive Nashville. From the moment he entered the country music world, he stood in direct opposition to everything Music Row preferred. His background was rough, his attitude confrontational, and his willingness to cross lines made industry executives deeply uncomfortable. Yet despite all of that, Coe's talent was undeniable. His songwriting cut deep, his outlaw image felt authentic, and for a time, Nashville tolerated him because the records sold. Tolerance, however, is not acceptance. Coe's biggest mistake was believing he could exist within the system without obeying its unspoken rules. He spoke openly, offended easily, and refused to soften his image for radio or sponsors. In an industry built on polite appearances and controlled rebellion, Allan Coe went too far. He did not merely challenge boundaries. He ignored them completely. What followed was not a ban, but something far more effective. Radio support became selective. Media coverage grew cautious. Invitations thinned out. Nashville did not attack Coe publicly because controversy would only amplify his voice. Instead, they chose silence. His name slowly disappeared from the industry conversation. Coe continued to release music, and some of his songs became classics through other artists. Ironically, Nashville celebrated his songwriting while distancing itself from the songwriter. He was useful only when filtered through safer voices. As a performer, he was considered too risky. As a personality, too unpredictable. The industry's discomfort was not limited to one incident or album. It was cumulative. Every refusal to apologize, every uncomfortable interview, every reminder that Coe would not be managed added another reason to keep him at arm's length. Nashville prefers rebels who know when to stop rebelling. Allan Coe never did. By the time his influence was fully acknowledged, he was already outside the system. Festivals rarely featured him. Radio avoided him. Industry honors came slowly, if at all. He existed on the margins, respected by fans and fellow outlaws, but quietly erased from the mainstream narrative of country music. Allan Coe was not blacklisted because of a single controversy. He was quietly sidelined because Nashville realized it could never control him. And in a town built on control disguised as tradition, that made him unacceptable. Johnny Paycheck. Johnny Paycheck was one of the most authentic voices country music ever produced, and that authenticity terrified Nashville. His songs were raw, defiant, and unapologetically working class. When "Take This Job and Shove It" exploded, Paycheck became a symbol of rebellion that radio could not ignore. For a brief moment, the industry benefited from his image without fully accepting the man behind it. That balance did not last. Unlike artists who learned how to separate their public persona from their private life, Johnny Paycheck lived exactly as he sang. His struggles with addiction, violence, and the law were not carefully hidden scandals. They were part of who he was. Nashville does not mind troubled artists, as long as the trouble stays invisible. With Paycheck, it never did. There was no single event that ended his standing with the industry. Instead, trust quietly evaporated. Radio stations became hesitant. Promoters grew nervous. Labels saw him as unreliable. When legal problems escalated and prison time followed, Nashville did not rally behind him or wait for a comeback. They simply moved on. Paycheck was never officially banned. His records were still released. His name was not erased from history books. But industry support vanished. The safety net disappeared. In Nashville, reputation determines survival, and Johnny's reputation made him a risk no executive wanted to explain to advertisers. What makes Paycheck's quiet sidelining so telling is that his voice never lost its power. Even after prison, even after years of struggle, he could still deliver songs with a truth few others could match. Fans remained loyal. Fellow musicians respected him deeply. Yet Nashville treated him as a cautionary tale rather than a living legend. The industry prefers redemption stories that can be carefully scripted. Johnny Paycheck did not offer that. He did not soften his image. He did not rewrite his past. He remained difficult, unpredictable, and painfully real. For a system built on control, that was unacceptable. By the later years of his life, Paycheck existed almost entirely outside the mainstream country machine. His influence lived on through others, but he himself was rarely invited back into the spotlight. Not because he lacked talent, but because Nashville had decided he was no longer worth the risk. Johnny Paycheck was not destroyed by scandal alone. He was quietly abandoned by an industry that profits from rebellion, but refuses to stand beside those who truly live it. Kris Kristofferson. Kris Kristofferson was once everything Nashville claimed to admire. A gifted songwriter, a thoughtful lyricist, and a respected performer, he helped redefine what country music could say and who it could speak for. In the late 1960s and 1970s, his songs were recorded by legends, his name carried weight, and his presence symbolized intelligence and emotional depth within the genre. But Kris was never interested in staying comfortable. As the industry shifted toward tighter formats and safer messages, Kristofferson moved in the opposite direction. His writing grew more introspective, more political, and less concerned with radio appeal. He questioned authority, spoke openly about war, power, and hypocrisy, and refused to reduce his art to slogans. Nashville tolerated that freedom when his influence was undeniable. Later, it quietly withdrew when his independence became inconvenient. There was no scandal attached to Kris Kristofferson's fading visibility, no dramatic collapse. His career simply lost momentum inside the industry machine. Radio programmers stopped prioritizing his releases. Promotional support weakened. His albums arrived with little fanfare, treated as side notes rather than cultural events. Behind the scenes, Kristofferson was increasingly viewed as difficult to place. He did not fit the emerging country pop sound. He did not offer easily marketable narratives. He did not chase trends. Nashville prefers artists who adapt to the system. Kris remained loyal to his voice instead. What makes his quiet sidelining especially revealing is that his respect never disappeared. Other artists continued to cover his songs. Critics praised his writing. His influence remained everywhere, even as his own presence faded. Nashville was happy to celebrate the legacy, but hesitant to invest in the living artist. Over time, Kristofferson became more of a symbol than a participant. He was invited to be honored, referenced, and remembered, but rarely positioned as part of the genre's future. His relevance was confined to history, despite the fact that his work still spoke directly to the present. Kris Kristofferson was not pushed out for being controversial. He was gently moved aside for refusing to simplify himself. In a town that rewards clarity over complexity, that choice came at a cost. Nashville never shut the door on Kris Kristofferson. It simply stopped opening it. Billy Joe Shaver. Billy Joe Shaver was never a star in the way Nashville prefers to define one. He was something far more dangerous. A songwriter's songwriter. His words were raw, spiritual, violent, tender, and painfully honest. Legends recorded his songs. Outlaw icons respected him. Yet despite his influence, Billy Joe Shaver always lived just outside the protection of the industry he helped shape. From the beginning, Shaver existed on the margins of Nashville's power structure. His talent was undeniable, but his life was chaotic, uncompromising, and deeply personal. He did not polish his pain for radio. He did not soften his past for interviews. His songs came straight from addiction, loss, prison, faith, and violence. Nashville admired the art, but feared the artist. Unlike others who were slowly eased out after commercial peaks, Billy Joe Shaver was never fully embraced to begin with. He wrote hits for others while struggling to secure consistent support for himself. The industry was comfortable profiting from his words as long as someone else delivered them. Shaver, the man, was considered too unstable, too intense, and too unpredictable to promote safely. There was no blacklist memo, no moment when doors slammed shut. They were simply never fully opened. His albums often arrived with minimal promotion. Radio support was limited. Awards and recognition came late, if at all. Nashville treated him as a background figure, despite the fact that his writing shaped the voices of those standing at the center. What makes Billy Joe Shaver's quiet exclusion especially revealing is that his peers never doubted him. Waylon Jennings, Willie Nelson, and others openly praised his genius. Within the creative community, his status was unquestioned. But Nashville is not governed by respect alone. It is governed by control, reliability, and marketability. Shaver offered none of those. As the years passed, his life became more tragic. Personal losses piled up. Legal trouble followed. Yet even then, Nashville maintained its distance. Not because he lacked relevance, but because he never fit the image of success the industry wanted to present to the world. Billy Joe Shaver represents a particular kind of quiet blacklist. Not punishment for rebellion, but neglect rooted in discomfort. Nashville did not silence him. It simply allowed him to struggle alone while others carried his words to fame. In the end, Billy Joe Shaver remained exactly what Nashville could not manage, a brilliant broken truth teller who refused to be filtered. Steve Earle was never short on talent. From the moment he emerged, it was clear he possessed the songwriting depth, grit, and authenticity Nashville claimed to value. His early success positioned him as a bridge between outlaw country and a newer, more socially aware generation. For a while, the industry embraced him as long as his edges remained manageable. They didn't. Steve Earle spoke too clearly and too often. He addressed politics, class, addiction, and injustice without softening his message for radio or sponsors. In a town where ambiguity is safer than conviction, his directness made people nervous. Nashville prefers artists who let the song speak and leave everything else unsaid. Steve refused to stay silent off stage. As his personal struggles intensified, the industry's patience thinned. Addiction and legal troubles did not just affect his image. They provided Nashville with a reason to step back without saying so out loud. Radio airplay declined, promotional support evaporated, industry relationships cooled. Steve was not officially rejected. He simply stopped being prioritized. What followed was a familiar pattern. While he fought to rebuild his life and career, Nashville quietly adjusted its focus elsewhere. Younger artists arrived with fewer opinions and cleaner narratives. Steve's music continued to evolve, often growing stronger and more fearless, but it no longer fit the commercial lanes radio demanded. The irony is that Steve Earle never lost relevance. Critics praised his later work. Fellow musicians respected his honesty. Fans remained deeply loyal. Yet Nashville framed him as difficult rather than essential. His convictions made him admirable, but not marketable. And in Music Row, marketability decides who gets heard. Steve was allowed back into the conversation only in controlled doses. Occasional recognition, selective praise, carefully distanced respect. He was acknowledged as important, but rarely treated as central. His presence became something Nashville managed rather than supported. This is what quiet blacklisting looks like. No official ban, no dramatic fallout, just a slow withdrawal of resources, attention, and opportunity. Steve Earle was not punished for a single act. He was sidelined for refusing to dilute himself. In the end, Steve Earle remained exactly who he had always been: outspoken, uncompromising, and honest. Nashville tolerated that truth only when it could be ignored. When it could not, the system chose silence instead. Dwight Yoakam succeeded in Nashville without ever truly belonging to it. From the start, his career followed an unusual path. He broke through with a sound rooted in Bakersfield honky-tonk rather than the polished styles Music Row preferred. His music was sharp, traditional, and unapologetically different at a time when country radio was moving towards smoother, safer formulas. The hits came anyway, but acceptance never fully followed. Dwight's problem was not attitude or scandal. It was independence. Unlike many artists who quietly adapted to Nashville's expectations, Dwight built his own world. He surrounded himself with his own musicians, maintained creative control, and resisted industry pressure to soften his sound. While his records sold and his fan base grew, he remained oddly distant from the inner circles of Nashville power. Success did not translate into influence. As country radio became more centralized and tightly formatted in the 1990s, Dwight's relationship with the industry grew increasingly strained. His music still resonated with audiences, but it did not fit neatly into the evolving radio playlists. Programmers wanted familiarity and predictability. Dwight offered neither. Without any official rejection, his presence on radio quietly declined. Behind the scenes, he was viewed as hard to categorize. Too traditional for pop country trends, yet too unconventional to be safely nostalgic. Nashville prefers artists who can be clearly labeled and easily marketed. Dwight occupied an uncomfortable middle ground. He could not be ignored, but he could be contained. What makes Dwight Yoakam's quiet sidelining so revealing is that his career never collapsed. He continued to release respected albums, tour successfully, and maintain a loyal following. Yet, he was rarely positioned as a central figure in country music's ongoing story. Awards recognition was limited. Industry enthusiasm was muted. His name remained present, but never prioritized. Over time, Dwight became a reminder of something Nashville does not like to confront: that an artist can succeed without fully submitting to the system. Rather than confront that reality, the industry chose distance. He was allowed to exist, but not encouraged to lead. Dwight Yoakam was not pushed out for rebellion or controversy. He was quietly sidelined for refusing to be absorbed. In a town built on hierarchy and control, independence can be more threatening than defiance. Nashville never shut Dwight Yoakam out. It simply made sure he stayed just far enough away. Lee Greenwood. Lee Greenwood's story is one of the quietest and most uncomfortable examples of Nashville's selective silence. In the 1980s, Greenwood was everywhere. His voice carried across radio stations, award shows, and national stages. He became inseparable from a patriotic image that resonated deeply with a large American audience. For a time, Nashville embraced him as a reliable, bankable figure who represented stability and tradition. Then the climate changed. Unlike artists who faded due to scandal or decline, Lee Greenwood remained consistent. His voice did not weaken. His audience did not disappear. What changed was how the industry viewed his usefulness. As country music increasingly sought broader, less politically defined appeal, Greenwood's image became a complication rather than an asset. Nashville prefers flexibility. Greenwood represented conviction. There was no controversy that forced him out. No headline-grabbing incident. Instead, radio support quietly declined. Major promotional pushes stopped. His name appeared less frequently on festival lineups and award discussions. He was not attacked or criticized. He was simply no longer invited into the center of the conversation. Behind the scenes, Greenwood was increasingly seen as locked into one lane. In an industry obsessed with reinvention, that made executives uneasy. Nashville likes artists who can be reshaped as trends shift. Greenwood's identity was too clear, too defined, and too difficult to repackage without alienating either advertisers or audiences. What makes his quiet sidelining especially revealing is that it was framed as natural decline. The narrative suggested he had simply passed his peak, but Greenwood continued performing to large crowds and maintained a strong connection with fans. The disconnect was not demand. It was industry enthusiasm. Nashville never disowned Lee Greenwood. They honored his past when it was convenient. But they stopped investing in his present. He became a symbol rather than a participant, referenced more often in retrospectives than in forward-looking conversations about the genre. This is how quiet blacklisting works at its most polite. Greenwood was not punished. He was categorized, contained, and gently moved aside. The industry did not want to argue with him, nor did it want to stand beside him. Silence was easier. Lee Greenwood did not disappear because he failed to adapt musically. He faded from Nashville's inner circle because his identity could not be adjusted without compromise. In a town built on adaptability, certainty can become a liability. Nashville never closed the door on Lee Greenwood. It simply stopped answering when he knocked.